So I was just sitting there thinking, I was like, should I do a full complete breakdown of Cyberpunk 2077 and the Phantom Liberty DLC? But then I was like, you know what? I think I've covered it pretty extensively up to this point. I covered basically all of Phantom Liberty, and then I also covered the state of the base game of Cyberpunk 2077. And I think I did all of that pretty extensively, so I don't think I need to make a full like hour-long video basically breaking down the entirety of Cyberpunk 2077. So instead, I'm just gonna cut all those 5 videos together. I didn't touch on everything in these videos, like especially the base game story, because I didn't really care for it, but I definitely touched on the story in Phantom Liberty. But yeah, most of these videos are like a compilation of my thoughts on really the game after like patch 2.0 and later. But yeah, other than that, that's all I really got to say. Here's my 5 videos breaking down Cyberpunk 2077's base game and the Phantom Liberty DLC, a lot of the small details that I noticed that impressed me after patch 2.0, and just generally giving my thoughts on the game and what I love about this game so much.
First thing that's massively underrated in Cyberpunk and doesn't get enough credit is the Overhauled Apartment system. Now, I get the reason this is super underrated or rarely talked about really, and it's mostly from the fact that outside of your weapons locker and wardrobe, there's not many reasons to even go to your apartment, and especially when you consider the fact that you can save anywhere in the game. The apartments you can rent in Cyberpunk don't act as a sort of like world hub system or a home base. With that being said, it's also more than just aesthetics that's good about the apartments. The fact that you can gain an XP boost from sleeping in your apartments is a big advantage if you don't want to run around doing dozens of NPC scanners or side gigs. You can also invite your partner here and just hang out if you want to. Although I don't do it myself because I don't really like Pan Am like that. But you know, you can do that if you want to. Also, there's not much customization you can do to the apartments, but you can change certain mirrors with the Kuroshi frames and change it to any of the photo mode screenshots you've taken. But the best part of the apartments is there's just a lot more to do and many to choose from. I will say that they've missed the opportunity to have some of your iconic weapons showcased in your apartments in some of the open space here, which is a setback from what you can do in Corvo Bianco with Geralt's armor sets and weapons. Also, just more buffs for everything across the board when you do it inside your apartment, such as like taking consumables and showering. But overall, I think the apartments are very aesthetically pleasing and add to the immersion of Cyberpunk, even if they could have been expanded on in some way. I mentioned the iconic weapons a bit, and that's actually my next point, which is that the iconic weapons are the most satisfying aspect of combat in this game. Now, unfortunately, outside of Skippy and maybe Rebecca's shotgun, the story behind most iconic weapons isn't really that interesting, and I feel like they could have been a full side quest where you do certain kills like you do with Skippy, or I don't know, maybe you could have done something like you get tracked down by the original owner who wants their weapon back and you can bargain for it or something like that. Outside of that though, they are 100% one of the main reasons combat is so addicting to play in this game, and the reason I like to play this game over and over again, since I want to use all of them and get the most out of them, but I have to spec my character in a certain way. I don't really have a favorite, honestly. I mean, I always use the Dying Light iconic pistol to be fair, but every iconic, the ARs, all the SMGs, the melee weapons, all of them have a special gimmick. Gimmick's not really the right word. I guess special attribute to them that makes it better than their base version. But another bad thing about them is you can sometimes find better or higher DPS based versions of them, of the weapons, and then you combine that with the fact that you can put attachments on those base versions and not the iconics. And sometimes for certain iconics, running the base version with like the epic version and attachments on those weapons is just better. And I kind of see why they did that. Otherwise, literally no weapons other than the iconics will be used. Now that I'm talking about it, I wonder what kind of weapons they have for this game, because Baldur's Gate 3 has some insane mods for weapons, and it's not even an FPS game. But yeah, I bet you PC players are eating good over there. On the topic of FPS games, that's my next point actually, is that it's the best open world FPS game out there, and I won't take any arguments for this at all. You know, you have your Fallouts, your Far Cries, the Borderlands games. I really like the Dying Light games. I've also played Stalker 1. I really enjoyed that, but it doesn't matter at all. Cyberpunk is more fun than all of them combined, and I want people to argue with me on this. If CDPR wanted to make a genuine FPS game off the shooting mechanics of this game, I firmly believe it could rival something like Call of Duty or Battlefield's gunplay. The punchiness of each weapon, the sounds, how different they all feel. After experiencing it in first person, I don't think I could go to a third person view for the next game. Because if you remember, everyone was complaining that Cyberpunk was a first person only game, other than, driving cars and stuff. But I don't think Cyberpunk would be as, would have as intimate gunplay. I don't know, that's kind of a weird way to put it. But there's more to combat than just the weapons in Cyberpunk. And another aspect in which I think it is super underrated, that would be the vehicle combat. Now, as much glazing as I just did the first person combat in Cyberpunk, I might have to say the vehicle combat is on par, if not slightly above, in terms of how fun it is. Now, there's essentially 3 types of vehicle combat you can use in Cyberpunk. The one you've been watching is my favorite. The built-in launchers and miniguns on some cars that you can equip. There's also just a straight up pull out your gun and sort of play it like a drive-by shooting, and you can do it that way, which is also really fun. I just don't really do it that often because sometimes they can get a little weird and you take more damage just by ramming people with your car anyways. And the last one, which I really use to be honest, is the quick hack vehicle combat, which I think is still pretty cool to be honest, but I just really use it like the Sendevasan and the regular quick hacks where you can even blow up cars if you want to. I think I said a while ago that I sometimes just ride around that city and do nothing but drive, but I also sometimes just ride around and shoot everything in sight like it's GTA, just because it's so much fun with how in-depth the vehicle combat is, and I can't get enough of it. But let's move on from combat and talk about the refreshing areas that differ from the more intense city regions. I'm talking about the Badlands and Pacifica. If you're like me and usually complete sections of a map one by one, then you'll know that sometimes the dense areas like downtown and Japantown can get a bit much at times, especially since there's something to do at every corner of those places. And the wide openness of like the Badlands is such a nice change up and something people overlook as, I don't know, they just discount it as the place where the nomads are. Every playthrough I do, I'm doing all my side gigs and side quests, and then I catch up on my main quest and move to the Badlands, and then I go, alright, this is why I like games such as Elden Ring. Like in a similar way at least. I feel like the activities are placed in the same way in this region rather than just being all on top of each other like they are in the city. And then Pacifica is just so damn pleasing to look at. I think I've spent more time in photo mode in Pacifica than from actually being in Pacifica, and it really makes me wonder, kind of like Dogtown as well, how different these regions would look if they weren't just some rundown place detached from its surroundings. This next one's a really important one, and one I don't think gets enough credit. One I also can't do full justice to in a 15 to 20 minute video, but it's the attention to detail in Cyberpunk. Now I know people do talk about this to a fair extent, but I still feel like it's underrated and doesn't get talked about enough. I can clearly remember the first time I went, dang, they really went through a lot of effort to sort of flesh out the open world. The first time I remember it was whenever I would shotgun someone but not fully kill them, and they would start dangling their arm to their side. Then I shot them on and moved significantly slower than before. I was like, damn, that's a really nice touch, I won't lie. Or one of the few times that the street cred system comes in handy when you're looking for Anna Hamel in this quest, and you can ask the Ripper Doc in this area if he's seen her, and his reaction will be different if you have over, I think, 25 street cred versus not having it. And I absolutely love stuff like this in video games. When you do something in a game and you're like, you know what, let me go the extra mile anyways, even though you have no idea if what you're doing is going to pay off or not, and it does in some hidden or secret way, that to me is just so cool, and I love finding stuff like that, and it's the reason I 100% video games. I also love the fact that you can find David's XBD from Cyberpunk Edge Runners, and it's just straight up the beginning of the anime. Like, no one would care if this stuff wasn't added to the game, but I personally really appreciate it. And there's also a lot of little things as well. I'm sure anyone who's watching this video already knows about the merited Militech outcome depending on your choices. I also remember thinking how nervous Jackie looked when we were planning the Konpeki Plaza heist. And as you're talking with Dex and T-Bug before to go over the plan, you can clearly see there he is shaking his leg, showing he is in fact very nervous about the heist. And just so many things that, again, I would be here for another 20 minutes just talking about them. And finally, the 7th underrated thing in Cyberpunk that I think doesn't get enough credit is the Transmog Integration. I know this really shouldn't be a massive deal, and if this was 7 or 8 years ago, it honestly wouldn't be. But nowadays, the best that most video games will even offer is a toggle on or off your helmet during dialogue. And some open world games can't even do that anymore, and it's honestly pathetic. The fact that they removed armor from being attached to clothes, then added a full closet set to adjust your wardrobe, up to 6 sets, that you can change on the fly whenever you feel like it, to me that deserves a lot of praise. All the way back in 2020 when Cyberpunk released, I would, on purpose, choose bad clothing sets just because they look better than my hobo build I would need to scale properly. And I think you could actually upgrade those clothing items to sort of stay in line with your level progression, but it was never like the max level armor or health, since you needed a full set or legendary clothing for that. And ever since they retweaked how that works and added transmog to the game, it's made it a lot simpler to just pick and choose my outfits and dismantle or sell anything I don't really need. But yeah, that's just 7 of the let me see here, 12 that I wrote down of things that I think are super underrated in Cyberpunk 2077. The other 5 here are underrated parts as well, but they kind of have their own issues too, so to avoid any confusion, I just cut it down to 7. So today we're doing another 7th thing to the criminally underrated in Cyberpunk 2077, but this time it's exclusive to Phantom Liberty. And without wasting too much time, let's start with the first thing about Phantom Liberty that is super underrated, which is the Relic skill tree. To get these, you have to come across them in Dogtown on these terminals, which will net you 1 Relic skill point you can use in your skill tree. And to be more specific, what makes these skills and the skill tree itself underrated is how theory crafty it can get. We'll get back to why these skills are incredible even without all the bonuses, but the Relic skill tree is meant to enhance your pre-existing cyberware mods such as like mantis blades and monowire and stuff like that. And to be honest, it does a lot more than you think when you're playing on hard or very hard. Like the mantis blades, for example, this first skill, jailbreak, effectively lets you chain kill enemies after performing a finisher or dismembering an enemy, which will happen like 100 times out of 100. So you don't need to worry about stamina consumption for melee attacks, since it'll automatically charge to the next enemy that's closest to you. But each individual skill connected to jailbreak does something for every cyberware arm upgrade, and I use all of them. The monoware upgrade has a sort of like transfer effect, and it's mostly effective when you're playing against netrunners. The projectile launch upgrade gives you an extra launch capacity, and when you combine that with the axolotl upgrade that reduces the cooldown for cyberware upgrades, it just makes it like fun as hell to consistently double jump and launch rockets if you're fighting a big group of enemies. The shockwave effect on the gorilla arms works kind of like an AoE attack, but I think it's best used when fighting bosses or those skull enemies, since knocking them back gives you extra time to do follow-up attacks. And then the mantis blades, that gives you an extra bonus on top of what you already get from jailbreak. Essentially makes it like completely broken in the state it is right now. Now, as you can tell, I only focus on playing with the mantis blades and projectile launch for this playthrough, and it's because you have to keep going back and forth to the Ripper Dock to install which arm you want to use, and I hope they change that in the next Cyberpunk, because I really want to play with all of these arms whenever I feel like it. Me personally, I could care less how realistic it is to actually need to change your cyberware upgrades and go get them installed the correct way or whatever. I just want to play with all 4 of them all the time whenever I feel like it. And me, I don't really like one over the other. I like them all. But yeah, I think the skill tree is super underrated, and I think it's added a lot more depth to Cyberpunk's sort of like theory craftiness that you can do in the cyberware builds. Then you have the vulnerability analytics skill, by far my favorite singular skill in the entire Relic skill tree. Basically what it does is it shows you this little diamond spot on an enemy's weak spot, and if you take out that weak spot, it has a guaranteed critical hit chance, which is really good for like big Militech or Dogtown robots. I forget what they're called, but you know, those big ass robots with 2 machine gun arms. I will admit though, it's not practical to go for the weak points on regular enemies, since dealing headshots in most cases and in most builds will probably grant you critical damage no matter what, but it does add a sort of like a EMP blast effect that can also damage enemies that are close to the blast, and that's probably its more useful trait than dealing critical damage. The other 3 relic skills here are kind of whatever really. I mean, I do use them fairly often, but they're more like background bonuses that I don't really think about. But I still love the entire skill tree overall. I mean, straight up, like many of the things I've mentioned before, it's one of those things that CDPR has added with Phantom Liberty that increases the replay value of Cyberpunk tenfold. And a lot of these little things that CDPR has added, I feel like get overshadowed by the big set pieces of Phantom Liberty. But you know, when you look under the hood, you realize that they put a lot of effort into pretty much everything that they've added, and I feel like the skill tree is one of the best of them. But to touch on the other side of this, which is the cyberware upgrades themselves, is actually my next point. So one of the things that I like most in video games is trying different builds and using completely different weapons or upgrades to see which one of them I vibe with the most. And Cyberpunk's cyberware build variety was already like basically perfect before Phantom Liberty came out, but with the addition of the new mods that are very in-game kind of mods, like in terms of their requirements and stuff, but with the addition of these new mods, I've had to completely rethink how I spec my V and what kind of builds I want to do. I mean, I could go on forever and ever about my thought process when I'm at the Ripper Lock trying to figure out what works best for what I'm trying to go for. For example, I usually use one of the iconic operating systems like the Sandevisant or Berserk to start off my build, which would typically dictate what I use for in my frontal cortex as my net running options. But with the addition of the Chrome compressor, which adds at least 60 base cyberware capacity before upgrading it, I kind of just cave and break down my whole build for that mod alone, because you have no idea how many times I've had to remove a mod, find a replacement that's not as good, but it costs less mod space so I can equip another mod that's more important for my build. And it's just like, man, if I had like at least 30 more cyberware capacity, we'd be in business. But of course, I didn't have that option at the time, or not at least until they added this mod. And then there's the new like Kuroshi optics that adds, or sorry, it increases critical chance by 35%. Like, bro, 35%? Do you know how handy that comes in on something like very hard difficulty when enemies just eat bullets like it's lunch? But then I can't stop there, because for hands you have the immovable force mod, which is quite literally just a better version of shock absorber, the recoil mod. And then it also has another passive benefit from shooting behind cover that used to be tied to other perks and the reflexes. But then you also have the asymmetric stabilizer, which reduces all attacks like stamina costs by 18%. I'm like, all right, I gotta have that. But then there's also the electromag recycler, which gives you I think it gives you a 4% health and stamina boost when hitting enemies with a fully charged tech weapon. And I'm just like, man, I gotta have that too, especially if I have a tech build. They also added a new leg mod, which lets you sprint faster. I forget what percentage it was, maybe like 30% or something like that. And I'm gonna be honest, if you have dash unlocked, even if it's like the base dash, like dash 1, this is straight up useless, and I can't even pretend like it's a good mod. But then you have the peripheral inverse, where enemies do less damage the closer they are to you. And I'm like, of course I have to have that, right? Because I like to get in there. And then there's also one of my favorite mods, Chitin, which it adds an additional health regen of at least 10%. And I'm like, okay, again, I have to have it. Like, I have to have all of these, man. They're all so good. But it's also good that most of them fit in the same role in each of their separate systems. So picking all of them doesn't automatically make your build just good. You're still going to need things like Blood Pump. You're still going to need things like the Korenikov, right? But they make every cyberware build so interesting to build out, and really think about what you're willing to sacrifice to add some of these more powerful mods. And it's just perfect. Whatever team at CDPR was in charge of the cyberware stuff, they need a raise. And also, pretty please do not go to like a live service studio, because you could teach those guys a thing or two in the live service teams about build optimization and balance. I'm gonna have to cut a bit of this out because I'm just starting to ramble about cyberware for like 10 minutes, but let's see here. The next underrated point about Phantom Liberty is the level verticality in Dogtown, and I was actually really excited to talk about this. And I don't mean like level design. I mean actually like the steepness of Dogtown. The Dogtown gate is the lowest point of Dogtown, and as you move further into the area, it just gets higher up as you go, and all of that is without elevators. This is something that I think Dogtown has over Night City, because in Night City, to get on higher or lower elevation, 99% of the times you have to use an elevator, whereas in Dogtown there's just higher slopes or roads that are slightly like inclined or declined, and it feels more natural, kind of like a low and middle and higher sections of elevation without needing to just always rely on the elevator. Now, me personally, I would prefer more like staircases and ladders, or even just climbable crates and boxes to get from point A to B, and that's exactly what Dogtown does, and that's usually how I get around. It's also meant that I've been less incentivized to use a fast travel every time I'm near one, because I'll just go, you know, let me just hop down here and then hop down there and then hop down there, and then I'm good. And anything that helps with the flow of a region and encourages you to travel by, like, I don't know, traditional means and not just fast travel all over the place, anything that helps with that is a positive. And this is definitely something that I never see anyone really talk about. Let's move on though to my next point, which is the loot drops or airdrops that happen in Dogtown. At first I thought they were just random activities that they randomize to happen about every 20 minutes or so, but I think the airdrops contain some of the best loot and rewards from anything else in the entire game. Now, these airdrops you have to get to are usually guarded by badass soldiers, and you have to take them out before they loot it for themselves. But after you take all of them out, you can jack in and quick hack unlock the drop box. And I swear, every goddamn one of these, at least like the first 20 or so, have some like special iconic weapon or level progression shard that makes it just like the best activity to farm for XP and just like loot in general. The first iconic weapon I got from these drops was the Leica revolver, and I was like, man, this revolver, I hate revolvers, because I didn't really like revolvers in this game before I played with some of the iconic ones. And so I shot it a couple times to test it out, and then I shot a couple of bad guys on the street, and then of course I was like, you know what, no, I actually really like this one, and I instantly knew I had to add it to my loadout and try it a bit more. And then there was another iconic I got from another drop, which was an automatic shotgun with a burn effect, I think. And yeah, when I play with weapons like this, it really makes me hate the fact that Cyberpunk doesn't have a weapon wheel system like in GTA, because every iconic is so fun to use. And since these airdrops drop multiple times throughout the day and at different locations, it feels like there's always something to do and for some pretty good stuff. So I mean, it's just very well executed overall. And one of the best things about Phantom Liberty is that it has really good repeatable content and for good rewards. So I really like the system. All right, so number 5 is vendor encounters and NPC depth. That's what I wrote. We'll start with the vendor encounters. One thing I didn't like about the vendors in the base game of Cyberpunk is, I guess, just kind of how stale they all felt. Like, they all delivered the same little boring dialogue lines like drones, and you may as well replace them with robots. Outside of the like odd Ripper doc that's tied to a side quest or even a main quest like Victor and who's the other one, Fingers, most of them are like, they're like, I don't know, hey, I hate you, hurry up and buy something. Or they're like, yes, you've come to the right place for weapons. You know, it's just a massive step back from how I remembered like the blacksmiths and the herbalist or from The Witcher 3. They have definitely fixed that here in the DLC, and every vendor encounter feels unique. They all have personality. Some of them are a bit goofy, but I really dig all of the encounters and how much more human they all feel compared to before. NPC depth I wrote down here. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what I meant by that. I do like the side quests a hell of a lot more than the base game, so maybe that was it. It's kind of pointless to single that out though, because like all of the characters present in Dogtown, even down to the bums on the street talking to each other, have more emotional depth than the base game as a whole. At least that's what I think. And number 6 will be the vehicle contracts. I love doing these, even though it's the same thing over and over again with slight variation. Like sometimes the vehicle mission is a time limit mission. I probably like those the best, to be honest. And then there's also your standard lose the pursuit or defeat enemies missions. There's also one that I only got like twice before, where you have to deliver the car in a very good condition, so like not beat up or anything. That means no ramming people off the road. Actually, I just figured it out. You know what it is? I think it's because I always use like the same 7 to 8 or 9 cars, and so I'm forced to use these cars that I would have never used otherwise. That's probably why I haven't gotten bored of them. And last but not least, the 7th thing that's underrated in Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty is the Barghest Outpost. Also, I know it's actually pronounced Barghest, but Barghest is just easier to say, and I don't sound like a pirate while saying it. But I mainly added this one to the list because the layout of each one is, I don't know what word to use, like I guess dynamic almost. I'll avoid calling it level design because I'm not very knowledgeable about what that even means, and I don't have the confidence to just spew and act like I have a clue of what I'm talking about. All of the Badlands Outposts play so differently from each other, and the interior of all of them just looks awesome. My only complaint here is that you can't redo them on repeat and maybe like crank the difficulty each time you complete it. That would have been a fun idea and added even more replay value to Phantom Liberty. But as they are right now, I really do like them, and I'm disappointed every time I complete them all and I run out of ones to do. But that's another 7 criminally underrated things in Cyberpunk 2077, but this time focusing on the Phantom Liberty expansion. I think when we look back in 10 years and look at this game with rose-tinted glasses, we'll all appreciate it more than we are right now. Cyberpunk as a whole is massively underrated by a lot of people simply from what happened with its launch. And I'm not saying that people aren't entitled to holding to their opinions about the game from their first experience, but it would be disingenuous to act like this game hasn't made massive strides to being one of the best open world games we've seen since like 2018 with Red Dead 2. But before I start preaching and going on and on, let me know what y'all thought of my list. And also, if you have anything to add that I didn't mention, or if you disagreed with something that I said, then as always, leave your thoughts in the comments. You know, as I sit here and think about how much Cyberpunk I've played, but how little of it I've understood up until this point, it really makes me regret dismissing the shards and just the environment around me, because I was way more immersed in the gameplay than anything. I know that sounds a little contrived, but it was really only till the Phantom Liberty DLC that I felt a connection, not only with the story, but the world it takes place in. Having well over 550 hours across like both versions, PS4 and PS5 versions of the game, and most of it being spent obsessing over different guns and cyberware builds, and that running my way closer to David and Lucy, I found it very easy to just forget how grim everything was beyond the neon aesthetic. And so when I sunk another like 30 to 35 hours initially into my Phantom Liberty playthrough, my first playthrough, and I was just left speechless for like a good 20 minutes when the credits rolled, it really brought me back down to reality of how brutal Cyberpunk is in general. I'm not saying the base game of Cyberpunk doesn't have emotionally gripping moments, like the side quest and the main quest, they have their moments, but Phantom Liberty did it in a way that was way more subtle, that it just sneaks up on you, or me at least, when I least expected it. And I just wanted to discuss what I found so fascinating about the characters, the story, the themes of like mistrust and isolation, and most importantly, the feeling of hopelessness in a hopeless city. Just a fair warning to you though, this is most likely going to come off as an emotional commentary, and that's exactly what it is, honestly. So if I misspeak or don't convey something in the right way, just know I'm trying my best to put my thoughts together while also winging this after my 4th completion of the DLC. But let's get into it. First, let me give a Cliff Notes version of the beginning of the story and why we found ourselves in Dogtown to begin with. A mysterious woman will call you after dealing with the Voodoo Boys in the base game, and she says she has the solution to your life-threatening problem, the Relic. V, being skeptical about this, isn't sure if it's real or a bad prank, but they bite the bullet anyways since they literally have nothing to lose by investigating it. And so this woman tells us to meet her outside of the Dogtown gates, and she'll get into more detail on what this help looks like and what she'll inevitably ask from us in return. And that's basically where we begin. The first thing I'll start with is the characters, and right off the bat, I want to point out something that I didn't catch on my initial playthrough, but on subsequent playthroughs, I immediately picked up on, and that's the tone that the characters speak with. We'll start in order of introductions. Songbird, or So Me, who is the first FIA agent we're in contact with, came off as relatively calm and collected when we met her outside of Dogtown. But as soon as we start to talk to her, about the Konpeki Plaza heist.
Apologize upfront for the query, but I gotta ask. Konpeki Plaza heist. Regret it?
Read the room, Songbird.
And her reasoning for contacting us, it quickly shifts from a calm tone to almost like fatigued. Like, if you ever spoken to someone who's had their life just like turned upside down and they've just been beaten over and over again, you can sort of tell that they're at the end of their rope. It's like if sound had vitality, you can instantly notice that that person has none, which is why it's also important to watch out for things like body language as well. Songbird is often looking down, or she's staring off into the distance nonchalantly after a pause between questions. And on my first playthrough, I was keying in more so on what she was saying rather than how she was saying it. But I think this comes down to a brilliant performance done by Minji Change. Sorry if I'm not saying that right. But the way she delivers her lines in basically every instance is perfection, and really portrays the mix of like desperation and anxiety and sadness that we see in Songbird.
And it means I trust you.
But next we meet the NUSA President Rosalind Myers, who put up a decent fight when we first meet her, but she speaks with much more conviction and resolve than Songbird. Although she has her moments of uncertainty, she mostly seems to have a firm grasp on whatever situation you put her in, and for a character to have such a contrast from our previous companion, I just felt like there was much more to her than meets the eye, which there is, but to avoid any major spoilers, I'll just say that she has a very absolute personality and does not care whatsoever who is in her way, and she will get what she wants, whether it's by force or cooperation. But that leads us to our third character, who was played by Idris Elba, Solomon Reed, and the second FIA agent, and also, dare I say it, is one of the most complex and compelling additions to the Cyberpunk world as a whole. You can talk to this guy for about 5 minutes and tell that he wears his heart on his sleeve, with the many regrets that come with that. When we meet Reed at the basketball court, he discreetly puts a revolver in V's ribs, but later apologizes and says it was necessary for caution or assurance or whatever.
Before we go, apologies for the precautions. I only ever risk so much. Sometimes it's just safer to shove the barrel of a Malorian between the Chooms' ribs, even if he is on your side.
But Reed's first meeting with V and a follow-up meeting with Myers gives us the understanding that Reed is a very, very calculated and vigilant person who sticks to his ideals more than anything else, and I can respect that. And the last addition to the crew and FIA agents is Alex, who is pretty visibly bitter and angered by being a sleeper agent who needs to come out of hiding to help with the mission that we've been given. The tension between her and Reed almost led to us being shot, so it's safe to say that any trust or goodwill between them is dead and gone. Now, this isn't a story deep dive type of video or like an ending explained, like those videos people don't even try to, takes no effort. But one of the most fascinating and relatable characteristics that all of these main players share, again, is the feeling of mistrust and isolation. This is the biggest component of the story's vibe, and will have you yourself second guessing each person's true intentions or meaning behind their actions. And that rubbing off on you is a very deliberate tactic, I feel, from CDPR. Even before some of the major climactic moments in the story, you are constantly being pinned on one side against the other.
I can't trust a soul.
It first starts when you are escorting Myers through the museum, and if you take the time to inspect the sculptures in this room, you'll get a lot of dialogue from both Myers and Songbird. Myers explaining the history of Dogtown, and Songbird expressing contempt for her responses, that she feels omitted her from some of the blame for things that were her fault as well.
So Militech sank money into Dogtown too?
That's not what it was called then, but yes.
On paper, urban renewal. Under that cover, military infrastructure development. but abandon all hope of hearing a word of truth.
And as you progress through the story, you'll see that contempt is pretty well founded, if I'm being honest. I would really like to talk about the history between Reed and Alex and Songbird as well, but that would straight up be spoiling the best bits of tension, so I won't do that. Just know that this level of resentment and mistrust between those three is as strong as it is with Myers and Songbird as well. This rift that's been caused between them has isolated themselves from each other, and problems like that don't just go away. It's like an infection. The longer you let it fester, the worse it's going to be in the long term, and the dynamic was perfectly executed here. Next is the tone of hopelessness that you feel when you're roaming through Dogtown. I'll bring up two of the best quests in the game that were added with the DLC, just as some examples, and I'll try to keep it as vague and brief as possible. The first quest I wanted to mention deals with a boxer who has some shady dealings with his old gang affiliation that will be detrimental to his career if he doesn't deal with it. Now, thankfully, this quest, unlike many of the quests in the game, has an excellent ending if you choose the right choices, but it's very easy to mess this quest up if you're not careful, and let's just say that Aaron suffers for it in a heartbreaking way, especially as you get to know him. Trust me, you'll be rooting for him because he just seems like a really genuine and good guy who is given a shit hand in life. Well, like everyone in the game.
It's a fucking shitty story all in all, V.
But you still want to see him succeed. So when I did the, let's say renegade option on purpose, just to see the outcome, I was like, God damn it. I really didn't want to see that. But of course, I went to the separate save I did and redid the good ending. And it was, of course, wonderful. It's one of the best quests in the game, in my opinion, and I've never seen it get talked about online. But that feeling of trying to help someone with good intentions, but in a brute force or aggressive way, and it comes back to bite not you, but the person you were helping, that really makes you feel like most of the actions you take are hopeless and they'll always end badly no matter what. The second quest is called Waiting for Dodger, and it sees you helping two police officers, Bill and Charles, escape from street gang leader Dodger. I would say this quest is even more easy to screw up, but it also contrasts with the errand quest, so if you messed up one, you'll likely mess up the other. That's because what seems to be the sort of paragon option in this quest is the absolute worst option, and this again just reinforces that feeling of hopelessness. I picked these two quests as examples because they perfectly match in terms of the goal, but the destination to that goal is very different. And so it keeps you mindful of how impactful your choices can and will be. But this is one of the main reasons why I actually paid close attention to side gigs and jobs when going through Phantom Liberty compared to the base game. In the base game, you can pass quests through a plethora of different ways to get the good endings to the quest, like speech checks or just being really thorough in the jobs checklist. In Phantom Liberty, it often comes down to one or two choices that don't really seem to have much significance until you learn of the consequences later on. And you know what? Screw what I was saying earlier. I didn't want to talk about the endings in too good a detail to avoid spoilers, but I want to at least talk about the endings to Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty. And so I'll put up a spoiler warning for the next section, which will go over the endings. Okay, so there is a pivotal moment in choosing your side of allegiance between Songbird and Reed, and the consequences are at its peak as you'd expect. If you pick the good side, i.e. siding with Songbird, Alex will kill Hansen, and you'll look to make your escape with Songbird. After fighting your way through endless Barghest, you'll split up with Song so she can compose the next part of the plan, which is through accessing the neural matrix. Now, I'm not going to go into a lore bore or just cock tease you anymore, but Songbird admitted that access to the Blackwall rogue AI, which will cure V's biochip in her condition as well from tampering with the Blackwall, it can only be used once. So only one person can get the cure from this.
The only one I've betrayed.
Mine's wandering some. Blackwall gotta be.
Neural matrix V can only be used once.
Once? How so?
It's a captive AI from beyond the wall. Relies on continuous evolution to exist. I'll free it and end the process. It'll then execute my commands and disintegrate irretrievably.
Now, this moment for me, when it happened, I just went Of course. And I laughed for a good minute. Even Johnny had to give her props. Like, her deception ran so deep. I was actually quite impressed with it, I'm not gonna lie. Despite all of that, she is basically infunctional with all she's been through. So ultimately, it is up to V whether or not she gets secure for herself, and if they ultimately decide her position or why she lied in the first place is still worth it. Me personally, I kind of felt bad for her, even though she did betray me. It was always worth the risk, like in my V's eyes. I still can't tell if she was telling the truth to V, like in the last moment and being genuine in that last moment, or if it was like some last ditch attempt to get the cure for herself. Either way, right before we get to the space shuttle, Reed pops his ass out and we have a confrontation with him over everything that's happened, and there really isn't a good end to this confrontation. You either relinquish Songbird to Reed in exchange for a cure, but leaving her to the testing and probing from the NUSA's like scientists or whoever the fuck. And the only real option in my eyes is to shoot and kill Reed in this situation, which again is also just really shitty. You load up Songbird onto the shuttle and you say your goodbyes even though she's unconscious, and watch as it takes off into orbit, and that's it. You have a really cool moment with Johnny, which I really liked and felt like the base game was desperately missing. Like, there's just moment of like taking everything into perspective. It was like rushed sort of at the end of the game, but I feel like for the most part, this sort of like one-to-one conversation with Johnny is just straight up missing from the base game, and I really like that touch at the end of, I guess, Songbird's path. Now, this is the good ending, at least in my eyes, and even then, like, holy shit, the decisions you have to make are just, they're shitter, or just extremely shit, but you got to make it. That's the game. That's Cyberpunk. You have to make those choices. Now, I'll briefly go with I'll go over the bad side, or just siding with Reed, because it actually upsets me to even go through and recount the events that take place. So, what it basically happens is Songbird isn't stupid. When you choose to side with Reed, and let's say you try to incapacitate her, she sniffs it out like a bloodhound because she's not dumb, and she alerts Hansen, or Hansen is alerted, whatever, who then kills Alex, who's up there in the box with them. You then have to plan with Reed on how to recapture Song, who has escaped, obviously. You get hunted down by a murderous robot that you can't even fight back. It's like some Resident Evil, those Resident Evil 1 hour sections where you have to play as some like random ass character. And when you finally reach Song, you have two options. Either A, you can free her from the NUSA's like grasp and let her die right there with dignity. And B, you can be a bitch and hand her over like the little bitch that you are.
I know what kind of man you are.
Sorry, that was totally uncalled for. As you can tell, I really don't like this option. And as I would say, the most sane people don't like this option as well. And that's basically the end on the bad ending, or Reed's ending. Well, not actually. If you decided to choose brain rot and recapture Song, or if you decided to let her die, your interactions with both Reed and Myers will be very different afterwards. But that's essentially the ending to Reed's path. No matter what you choose to do or what choices you've made along the way, it's always a shitty situation no matter how you look at it. And I think this series of tragedies is what makes Phantom Liberty so unique and stand out from the base game to me, that I just missed that feeling from the base game. I didn't really feel with as many endings as it had. It branched out in too many different ways for me to really feel like there's different paths you can go in Phantom Liberty, but at the end they all kind of converge to the same point, right? So it's sort of like that journey of everything that you experience on the destination to the end, and I just really value that experience. But yeah, I think that's it. I told you it was going to get a little emotional, didn't I? Towards the end I was recounting and just trying to think of how I wanted to phrase certain events, and it really made me like just depressed thinking about it again, even though I love it. But it is an amazing experience, and if you haven't played Phantom Liberty, I cannot recommend it enough. It's $30, but it's constantly on sale for like $20, which is just, it's a complete steal. It's like you're robbing them. The quality of this is
where the AAA game itself, I don't care if it's a DLC. The people say the same thing about Elden Ring DLC, and that holds true here as well. So I find that one of the most frustrating things about single player games is that you can only really play them like once or twice before you're done with it, or at least to the point to where you're satisfied to what you've played with. And in most cases, I find that to be a net negative. And you can tell that makes me an RPG fan, since most normal people can't even imagine playing a game from start to finish more than twice. You know, maybe they go for a different ending, or maybe they pick a different playstyle on their second run. But besides that, most players, they might play the game through to the end like twice, if they even finish it at all. So I understand that I'm the outlier here, and playing a single player game for more than 500 hours isn't normal, and I get that. But that's what it's like for me, and like I would say at least 90% of the open world games that I play. And I've only really gotten that from like 7 or 8 games. But that's exactly what Cyberpunk has done for me. And no matter how much I replay it, no matter how many times I replay the same enemy encounters, no matter how many times I replay with the same playstyle, no matter how many times I completed the game, which is at least like a dozen at this point, I have lost count. But it simply does not get old doing the same shit over and over and over again. And it's an anomaly, obviously. And also, I think Cyberpunk has sort of hacked my brain, because in a lot of open world games that I played before Cyberpunk, I would just go from objective to objective, or bandit camp to bandit camp, and I would never really take time to take the game in and just drive around that city with the radio on and do basically nothing. Before, I was like, I really don't have time for that shit. I got work in like 2 hours, and so I'd rush from like one point of interest to the next. But like I've said before, this game is so damn atmospheric and vibey that it's literally impossible for me to go more than an hour of playing and to not open up photo mode, or to just hop in one of my 15 Mustang variants and just cruise around for a little bit. But I've never had so much fun, well, at least outside of Baldur's Gate 3 for this, but I've never had so much fun mixing and matching different builds and weapons and just seeing what happens across different playthroughs. Now, I'm going to be honest, and you can probably tell from the gameplay that I'm showing you, I don't usually go with the most difficult difficulty. I usually just leave it on like the regular difficulty, at least until I reach Phantom Liberty, the DLC. And that's because I like to at least have the option to listen to a podcast or watch videos while I'm completing gigs or the NCPD scanners. As I've said before, the story of the base Cyberpunk 2077 game does absolutely nothing for me at all. I do not give a single fuck about the story of the base game. Like, I swear they could replace half of the main characters from the base game story, and legit, I don't think I'd be able to notice for a little bit. Eventually I'd catch on, but that's how little I care about the base story of this game. And obviously, to anyone who has more than 2 brain cells, the Phantom Liberty story is just leagues better. And so I like to give all my attention to those quests and those cutscenes. The weird thing is, though, is that I don't value them differently. Like, the base game, I don't value it less than the DLC. To me, they're almost in a way like different games that I could just play differently and have just as much fun doing either of them. And like every single gun, every single melee weapon, every cyberware augment, genuinely, every tool you have at your disposal in Cyberpunk is just more fun than anything else that there is on the market right now. At least in terms of like single player games. And that's another reason why I like it so much, is I don't have to be like all locked in and like don't want to get off because I've played 6 hours and I didn't gain any ranked points or RR Valorant. But I can play Cyberpunk for like 30 minutes if that's all I have and be satisfied with it. And like I said before, it just does not get old. And I'm not sure it ever will. Despite all the controversy that surrounded this game for some time, it is still one of the most engaging and complex games that we've ever received. Like, I don't think you can honestly dispute that otherwise. I don't care if they haven't delivered on their original vision, end quote, as a lot of morons just like to parrot. It's a fun and addictive video game. That's really all that matters. Who cares about the original premise or whatever if you're having a good time? But whatever, I'm gonna stop because I'm not even trying to get into all that. But yeah, I don't know, like, I can see myself playing nothing but Cyberpunk and Baldur's Gate 3 if I was forced to just play those 2 games until GTA 6 came out. These games have probably at least half my playtime over the past 3 years, with over 2,000 hours combined for just these 2 games. To me, at least, that's insane. I know some multiplayer gamers, they have thousands of hours in a single game, and I don't know, good on you, bro. But yeah, I love playing this game. I doubt I'll ever get burnt out or tired of playing it. And again, outside of Baldur's Gate 3, it is the most fun I've had playing anything probably ever.
We all know the Cyberpunk 2077 sequel is like a good 8 years away at least, with The Witcher 4 currently in full production and other Witcher projects in early development, like The Witcher 1 Remake, which is scheduled ahead of Cyberpunk Orion. I'm not the type of person to usually eagle-eye a game that's years out from release, but I was scrolling through the Cyberpunk subreddit called Low Sodium Cyberpunk, which is a more casual and fun than like the main subreddit for Cyberpunk. But yeah, I came across this post that was asking what are some of the things players would like to see more in the next game, or new additions that would beef up Cyberpunk's open world. And I found a lot more interesting topics than I thought I would. It's usually just the basic stuff that people say, like, you know, more player freedom. Like, okay, no duh. There's some interesting ideas I found in the replies though that I thought it could actually work if they implemented it well. And I'm talking about things that are within reasonable expectations for a video game. I think the worst thing that all of that Cyberpunk hype did was it created this unrealistic expectation of some really cool ideas that don't make sense in like a gameplay loop. Like flying cars with vehicle combat. Stuff like that almost always will be a modded edition because it's just impossible to create 2 separate driving systems and combat systems, you know, like one on the ground and one in the air in a reasonable scope. So I'm talking about things that are very likely to be in the game, and it's just about executing them right. But yeah, let's go through some of the comments here. This is out of my ordinary form of content that I usually make videos on, so bear with me if I'm out of my element here. Okay, so the first comment that immediately caught my eye was actually from the OP themselves, though I can't get them credit since the account is deleted. But this first point here says, definitely more Braindance detective work and perhaps expand a little bit by adding more layers. Also, ability to view non-quest Braindances. Imagine going to a Braindance shop and buy them to watch later in your apartment. I could not agree more with this first point here. One of the things that I liked about Phantom Liberty the most was that they removed all of the mandatory Braindances. And not because I didn't like the idea of using a biochip to relive moments from a robbery or a murder, but it was because it felt very shallow and incomplete of a system. The last green audio layer is almost never utilized, and when it is, it doesn't really serve a purpose outside of the dialogue that you're already going to receive. I wish that Braindances were more important in terms of finding hidden clues and secrets in, I don't know, like random quests or added lore to the game. Instead, all they really serve to do is provide you with information you're gonna get anyways, and so it really felt like it was a tacked on feature. And I 100% agree that they need to be more complex and in-depth in Cyberpunk 2. The OP also makes a good follow-up suggestion, and he's referencing the Cyberpunk lore book here, but saying he wants more quests where we would see unique implants that aren't combat specific. This sort of falls into that customization of Cyberpunk that people want to see. And although I personally like how customizable it already was in terms of like cyberware and outfits and things like that, there was always room for more customization. Unlimited customization doesn't exist in video games, but it can almost always be more. So yeah, I think just on a personal note, way more customizable weapons into working many different ways, like turning a 7.62 assault rifle into a beam rifle, or turning a 9mm pistol into explosive hand cannon or revolver. I know I'm getting very Fallout with saying that, but I feel like the customization for weapons was the most limiting aspect of Cyberpunk, at least in terms of combat. The third point OP makes is more interactions with gangs, being able to join a gang and take part in gang feuds, or simply more exposure to gang wars. This one I think is a slam dunk, and I don't think we need to worry about this one at all. But it's good to talk about it still. I don't know which update added the gang chases you'd see randomly when you're riding through Night City, or when the gangs would retaliate against you for doing certain amount of gigs in their region. But I remember feeling like the game was so much more lived in than it was at the start of the game. Also, something I don't see people bring up too often is police behavior in regions where you are allied with or against certain gangs. It would be so cool to be able to get away with petty crimes all because you're sided with a particular gang in this region, or police are more suspicious on you and they crack down on you more when you're in a rival's territory. It almost would be like the Dying Light 2's faction system, where you have these two factions, and choosing one over the other has its rewards and drawbacks. Although it doesn't really play out like that in Dying Light 2, to be honest, but you get what I mean. But now onto the comments themselves, and the first one here is from Jake Paul Official, and he says, just a good story with twists and cool characters, and also music. By music, I guess he means a good OST. I'm sure he understands that the game will indeed have music, but this is something I talked about at the end of my Phantom Liberty video, and it's that the characters and story in Phantom Liberty is 100 times more in depth and interesting than the base game is, at least to me. And you can say, well, the base game had like 6 or 7 different endings, while Phantom Liberty had really only like 2. And yeah, that's the whole point. At least for me, they were able to keep the story more focused while still letting you have the same level of player freedom. I didn't vibe with anyone from the main story outside of maybe like Takimura or maybe Rogue in some parts. I kind of like Rogue's story, and I think that's because his storyline was so much more interesting to me. The sort of like, like the redemption arc, like you're having to redeem yourself. I really find those storylines very interesting. The companion storylines kind of felt like an afterthought that was tacked on to add depth to V, Johnny, and Takimura's storylines. They just didn't feel, I guess, emotionally in depth enough, at least compared to Phantom Liberty. And so yeah, I totally agree. Cool characters and a great storyline with twists, that's all we can really hope for. This one is from JTruth9, which says, more dynamic stealth kills, one button quick hack combo uploads, cooler bullet blocking animations. And I guess I'll start by saying, I think the stealth kills are plenty dynamic enough as they are. Maybe a more refined stealth skill tree? I think that's actually way more important than cooler looking stealth kills, at least personally. Also, cooler bullet blocking animations, again, that's just sort of falls into like the animations in general of the game. I'm sure that those will be improved across the board, so I'm not really worried about that one. Another comment here from LT_Johnson says, recreational BDs and lots of them, more verticality and rewards for exploration in the form of rare clothing items and stuff, more interactiveness with NPCs, more sort of in-game games, like how Witcher had Gwent, a flashlight or an upgrade that lets you see in low visibility situations. Yes, I definitely agree with that one. Some sort of jetpack or transportation by air, triple jump, more stealth kill options, bow and arrow. I definitely agree with that. I agree with a lot of the stuff he said here. More genuine options for stealth rather than just a suppressor. That is definitely key. More weapons, more, skill options, stuff like that. Also, I could have sworn they removed the legendary clothing items because people complained about how armor was tied to clothing. The part here about in-game games, God, that's a tongue twister. I absolutely agree with it though. I think I speak for everyone when I say in-game mini games. There aren't some dinky arcade games and that are actually fun and addicting, like he said, Gwent from The Witcher, or even playing poker or blackjack in Red Dead 2. I would spend a good 2 hours just straight gambling in Red Dead, and it was some of the most fun I had playing. The last comment I'll bring up, since you kind of get the gist of most of this, honestly, customization, open world interactivity, more in-depth combat system for stealth, more skill options for net running and stuff, better driving mechanics. Oh, I also forgot to mention one part for me is a day-night cycle where NPCs have a schedule of things they do every day like they do in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 would also be awesome. But you get the gist of it at this point, so we'll look at one last comment here from Mistress_Ploppy that says, more Chooms. You know what, Mistress Floppy? I couldn't agree more. All the Chooms in the world would be preferable. But yeah, I'll link the Reddit thread in the description if anyone wants to look through the replies. Although, again, most of them echo the same sentiment. Cyberpunk 2077 got a lot right, it got a lot wrong, but it got very little perfect. I don't want to hear, that's not possible. You can't please everyone. Everyone has different expectations. I'm not saying to cater to the fan base on everything. I am saying that anything they do add or change to Cyberpunk 2 or Cyberpunk 2078, whatever it's going to be called, to make it work as intended and as seamless as possible. Also a non-buggy, non-glitching, crashing, stuttery mess, because we know the game's going to be huge, and even though they likely have already learned their lessons from Cyberpunk 2077's launch, it's still possible they can repeat the mistakes. You know, you can't put anything past companies nowadays. That's just my 2 cents on it and the whole wish list or possibilities of things that could be in the next Cyberpunk game. Let me know what some of the things are for y'all wish list and things I didn't mention or bring up. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is very out of the, I guess, type of videos I like to usually make. It's sort of like analysis type of videos I usually make, or, you know, story deep dives kind of. So for me, going into discussion threads and just reading comments and just seeing what people think, you know, all the different opinions they render, it's not something I usually do, but it was actually really fun and I'm glad I did it. But anyways, that's it for me. I'll see you next time.